that did go back, I think were threatened a lot and kind of looked down. There was a lot of, it took years to get over the hard feelings that transpired.
Can you tell us a little bit more what it was like being on the city council at that time? You know, what were city council meetings like? Were there divisions between people in the council?
No, I think most, I was trying to think, I think there were, at that time there were 9 council members, and 5 of us were from DuPont's. One worked at the post office, and I think one of them was in management down at Clinton Foods. Now that I think back, I'd forgotten about that. And but you know, we discussed it, and our major concern was not to have any violence transpire in the community. So we tried to be as neutral as what we could be. And you know, DuPont's had a union, but it was a company union. It was a totally different type of a situation, and some of the council members were active in the union out there, but they never striked while I was out there, so usually they were able to work things out. But there'd been a long running animosity between the union and management at Clinton Foods. It was, you know, it was trying to think what it was. Clinton Corn Processing, it was Clinton Foods, it was Standard Brands. It had a number. It seemed like it changed names there quite often. And I was amazed because I knew a lot of the management people, and I would say probably a third of them maybe had worked in the plant. I mean, they were employees, so I thought they would be more sympathetic, but they weren't.
And what was it like working with the police? Was there any kind of tension there?
No, and of course, police were unionized at that time, but they were very professional, you know. And they were accused of a lot of goings on. There was a minister here in town that I can't think of his name anymore. Davis, I think was his last name. I can't remember anymore. But accused them of beating him and that kind of stuff. But I went down a few times just to observe, parked a safe distance away, and the major times was when employees were going in and out of the plant at the time changes. And so a couple of us that were on that committee went down just to observe and see how, we didn't tell anybody, I mean, but just to observe how the police conducted themselves. And they were very professional. And I knew most of them. I'd grown, you know, like the chief, I'd grown up with him. His brother was on the force, Bob Welke, and I'd grown up with him, and several of the others that were on the force that I'd grown up and knew. So, and most of them were, you know, they might have been sympathetic, but they had a job to perform, and they did what they had to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We were also curious as to, like, what were your thoughts on the media coverage, and how are they perceiving the strike, and even the police force too? Was there a lot of bias, or do you think that it was pretty much to the point and true? And what were your thoughts?
I think it was pretty much true. Sometimes they would, you know, the news media tends to do sometimes. They kind of inflame things, but I think by and large, they tried to project a true picture of what was going on.
Mm-hmm. And then, I'm sorry if you're
well, there wasn't much TV in those days,
yeah.
so, you know, and I think that makes a big difference. Everything is instant now, where then, you know, it would take maybe a couple of days if something happened, or if an incident transpired or that. So that was probably one of the saving things about it.
And what about the general public? How were they handling the strike? Were they taking specific sides, or in general, or was it pretty much split down the middle?
Well, I think the business people, the downtown business people pretty well remained neutral. It did have an impact on their business, you know, their income. Because they were one of the larger, I think them and the railroad were probably the two largest employers here in Clinton, so. But the general public, I think it depended on your family and your situation, and even then, you know, like I said before, some families split over it. I mean, one brother would go in and work, and the other, and I had that situation, not me personally, but in my family, cousins, and so it was a strain on relationships.
Continuing, we have a couple more names that or a few more names that we were wondering if you had any information about. Did you remember hearing anything ever about the Clinton Labor Temple in general?
Well, no, but I knew some of the I'm trying to think, I can't remember their name now, but was president of the union. And I knew Mike Kronovich was a business manager, and he could have been less aggressive, let's just say that. He kind of stirred things up sometime. I can't think of the other, I was trying to think of the name of the person. Bob Napolitano was the president of the union at that time. And my mom and his wife played cards together. They were in the same church circle and everything. So it kind of, I wasn't at home anymore. I was married at that time. But I would hear pieces of conversation, you know, at dinners or family gatherings and that about things. And I never said anything about it, because sometimes things, it was all the perspective that the individual that was talking had, whether you were for or against the strike. So I'm trying to think of some of the other people that no, I can't think of any of that. I should have sat down and thought a little bit ahead of time. I didn't do that. Sorry.
It's fine, don't worry about it. A couple more. Did you ever hear anything about the Concerned Citizens of Clinton group?
No. I saw there was something in the paper about it, but I really wasn't involved, or I tried to remain as neutral as I could and not take any sides.
Mm-hmm. One more. Did you ever hear about anything with the St. Mark's United Methodist Church and their involvement? No. Okay. Okay. Well, if you're okay, we can go start talking about what happened after the strike. And we talked about your family, but was there anything else was there any other way that the Clinton corn strike affected you personally?
No, not really, because I wasn't employed down there, and my immediate family had all sought employment. My brother went with Alcoa, and I went with DuPont, and my sister went out to Complex, and my younger sister was away to college. She's 18 years younger than me, so she was, I think, away at college when that happened. But it really didn't, it took a long time, and it was kind of when you would have gatherings or groups, you know, even like we still went to the labor picnics and that kind of stuff, and there was still a lot of animosity then. I mean, they never really, nobody really, after the strike was resolved, or ended actually, that was when the union was uncertified, I think, decertified.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It took a while. A lot of the people moved out of town, you know, to find jobs, because you know, there wasn't that much, and plus there was kind of a stigma on the ones that had been active, really active, because some of them were quite active and antagonistic, and I think a lot of the employers kind of shied away from hiring. They probably knew from their contacts with management at Clinton Foods who some of those individuals are. And some of, they reported them in the, in the paper, and some of the stories it told about things that went on that, so. But, I really never had any retribution from people, and, that knew, and they knew I was on the city council. I was on for 10 years, so they knew me and knew what I was like and knew my family, so.
I was interested, you mentioned certain stories in the paper. Was there any story ever that like really stuck out to you of certain things that happened with people striking and anything in general? Or?
Not really. There were certain I had access to what really happened lots of times, and you'd see things reported that really didn't happen, and then you'd hear stories circulated about what had gone on, like the minister that got beaten, and it didn't happen, but made good press. So
Yeah.
I don't recall anymore. It's been so long ago.
Mm-hmm.
How the press covered that. I remember that it was brought up at the council at one of the council meetings, and the police chief. We met, I think, in a closed meeting to discuss it, and he told us, what had gone on. So, have you talked to Wayne, or?
I don't believe we have. I
I
don't
don't
think we've
think
been
so.
able to get a hold of him.
He might. He's kind of a private person.
Yeah.
I don't know what his feelings are on that.
Mhm.
And his brother Bob was also on the police department. I'm trying to think. A lot of them have passed away that or retired and moved that were on there.
Could you spell their last name for me?
Yeah, Wilke.
Perfect.
Wilke.
Okay. Going back to Clinton itself, you mentioned that a lot of people have left looking for jobs after the strike. What happened, or from your perspective at least, how would you describe Clinton economically after the strike? How did it affect Clinton? What did it get hard?
I think it in part was probably responsible. There's been kind of an economic decline ever since then.
Mhm.
And not totally blamed on that, but it probably made an impact on the labor market and companies coming in. Because if you have something like that going on, they'll, if there's another city nearby that's more receptive to not striking, the workforce and that, then they'll locate there. And, labor management relations are really important. I think they're key. And there were other, there's other factors that were involved with the railroad, and just there's been a general decline in the Midwest of manufacturing and that. And I think modernization, mechanizing equipment. I know even when I was there, we started using kind of the primitive computers. You wouldn't recognize them now. When because actually your phone is a miniature computer. So, but I think things became automated more, and that probably had an effect too. So.
Going back to your time at DuPont, it's DuPont's, right?
Yeah.
Okay. What would you say they did differently and specifically more correctly compared to Clinton? And what, because you mentioned that they had a union as well, but
Right.
What would you say that they did anything better?
It was what they called a company union.
A company union, yeah.
But it was, you had officers and everything, but it was, really, labor and management had a good relationship. They were always more generous in giving raises, and they were more willing to discuss things with the employees. It wasn't as adversarial, and I don't know what led to that. I have no idea, because I wasn't involved in the union. In fact, I'll ask. I've got a cousin that's still alive. He was involved in that. trying to think what he is. I think he's 88. So he was affected by it a lot more than what I was. And I think DuPont's safety standards were so much better. I mean, it was a good place. It was a clean place to work. I mean, you could practically eat off the floor, and you wouldn't want to touch the floor in a lot of places. And foods and different process. I mean, it was a food process. A lot of it was the process and that. But I mean, I know I worked shifts when I was going to college down there, and you'd be sitting in the break area, and the cockroaches were so thick it looked like the wall was moving. And plus, like I mentioned, a friend of mine that got killed down there, and I'm sure that they respected life just as much, but they didn't look after safety wasn't their key issue. The dollar line was the bottom. So, and I think that was probably the key difference. DuPont's was like a family. They had family picnics, although I think Clinton Foods had them at one. No, I think it was the Union. The Union used to have their family picnics, because I remember going to those when I was young, and Christmas parties and stuff. So I mean, they did. The Union was real good that way there, where DuPont's with the company sponsored all that. And, you knew everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. If you don't mind me asking, could we ask specifically how your friend died at Clinton?
Yeah, he was, well, I had two of them. One was electrocuted. And that was when I was going to college yet then. He they had Nuchar that they used to purify the syrup, to make it clear. And so they had bags of Nuchar, which is ground up charcoal. And you unload those. They came in bags, and then they'd unload it. They had a conveyor belt, and then he was jumping down out of the boxcar and put his hand on the boxcar and on the conveyor belt, and there was a short there that killed him. And then the other one was killed by a switch engine, by a train. They were switching cars, and evidently hadn't taken precautions enough to see that he was there. In fact, he was the son of one of the big shots at Clinton Foods.
Do you mind if we also get the names of those two people?
I'd rather not.
Okay, totally understand.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So then, what if any lessons are to be learned from the strike all these years later?
Oh, I don't know. I think if people would make an effort to communicate and sit down and talk things over, and it's just like you see in politics today. There's both sides to every story, and people should try to work together, and you can't always have your way. You got to compromise. You got to learn how to compromise. I've learned that through my life. The more you compromise, the better your life is. A lot easier your relationships with people and with children and everything. So.
You talked a little about your childhood and financial issues coming from strikes. Do you mind elaborating on that?
What was that again?
Financial issues coming from strikes. What the strikers and the families would have felt?
Yeah. Well, I mean, they ran out of unemployment. The strike was so long that the union didn't have a big enough fund. See, they had a strike fund. And they probably, because about every 2 or 3 years, they'd have a strike, a small strike. And so that they just didn't have the funds there for the number of people. I mean, there was a large, I'm sure over 1,000 people that went on strike. And so when they run out of funds, they run out of unemployment. They didn't have any money coming in, and so a lot of the churches and different groups would help them. And I know my dad was retired already then. I'm trying to think. I think he retired in 75. And they even